nothing. We practice eco-Buddhism together. The sound of the temple bell booms for all to cease from conflict. May the way of Buddha usher in the dawn of non-violent global village forever. Here is the after sound of the bell. Thunder of silence, light after Dharma rain. Om Amoka Vairakana Maha Mudra Manipadma Shavala Privataya
Please take a moment to straighten your mats and cushions, and then come stand together for the chanting of the 3 refuges. So we will first take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha in Sino-Korean, beginning with our lineage, and then a second time in English. So even if you do not know the words, please throw your voice into the sound as best you can. I go for refuge to the Buddha.
I go for refuge to the Buddha,
And resolve with all beings.
and resolve with all beings.
I will cultivate a heart of enlightenment.
I will cultivate a heart of enlightenment,
And realize the great way.
and realize the great way.
I go for refuge to the Dharma.
I go for refuge to Dharma,
And resolve with all beings.
and resolve with all beings.
I will penetrate the teachings.
I will penetrate the teachings,
And uncover oceans of wisdom.
and uncover oceans of wisdom.
I go for refuge to the Sangha.
I go for refuge to the Sangha,
And resolve with all beings.
and resolve with all beings.
I will seek peace and happiness for the many.
I will seek peace and happiness for the many,
And transform this world into Buddha lands unimpeded.
and transform this world into Buddha lands unimpeded.
Please return to your places now for another shorter period of meditation, about 5 minutes. please join me in some simple stretching. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Jagwa. Is your leg okay? Oh no. My name is Jagwa Kelly Davenport. I'm one of the Dharma teachers here in Ann Arbor. Nice to see all of you this morning. So this Friday evening was one of the most important dates on the annual Buddhist calendar. Some of you were there. And that was the Buddha's Enlightenment sitting. So every year around this time, we commemorate the historical Buddha's example of sitting through the night. And we're going to read the story of what he experienced about 2,500 years ago a little bit later today. And so on Friday evening, we sat in meditation from 8 p.m. The most stalwarts of the bunch until 4 a.m. And so I wanted to talk a little bit today in picking up from what Malum had spoken about a couple of weeks ago about this topic of enlightenment, which it turns out is kind of a hard thing to give a talk about. And as I was putting together some thoughts on this topic, I kept thinking about when I was a kid, I had one of those like plastic kaleidoscopes. Did you have one of those that had like little colored jewels in it? And if you turn it a certain direction, the jewels kind of shift within the lens and you see something different, right? Yeah. And so I think this talk is a little bit of a kaleidoscope kind of talk because I kept thinking about all the ways that I could try to put my finger on what is it about enlightenment that I wanted to tell you about, what was important to know about this concept. And each little turn maybe adds some understanding, but it's sort of difficult to put in a nutshell. So I'm going to tell a couple of little stories, and then we're going to read as a group the story of the Buddha's enlightenment experience. This morning, I was talking to my husband. I'm not sure why, but I feel a little bit nervous giving this talk. And he's like, well, just tell him, there was this guy 2,500 years ago, and he sat underneath a tree, and he really wanted to understand, what is this human life all about? Why are we having suffering? Why is it that the things we think are going to bring us happiness sometimes don't? And, just do what Howard says at the gym. So we've been going to this powerlifting gym for about a year and a half now. And we've become friends with this young guy, Howard, who's a powerlifter there. He's about 26. He's really strong. And he has a hilarious repertoire of catchphrases. And one of them is, "It ain't that deep." So that's the nutshell story. The guy wants to know how to live a human life. He sits under a tree and vows he's not going to get up until he has an understanding of this deep existential question. And then he goes on to teach for 40 years after that. And we trace our whole lineage back to his experience. But you may not know, he was not the first Buddha, the first awakened person. So if you dig into the scriptures, then you'll learn that every turning of the Dharma wheel, we say, every eon, there is a person like this. So that's the first story. That's the simplest one. We've all got Buddha nature. It ain't that deep. The second one is one that's sort of a little folk tale that we usually tell people who take the meditation class here. And that is, imagine that there's this vast ocean, and there's a big ancient sea turtle who lives in the vast ocean, hundreds of years old. And of course, dozens of times a day, the sea turtle has to rise to the surface to take a breath, right? They're not like a fish. They don't breathe underwater. They still have to come up for air. And one day, the sea turtle comes up in the midst of this vast ocean, takes a breath of air right through a tiny hole in a log that's floating on the surface of the ocean. What are the odds that that would happen? And we say that being gifted a human life is a little bit like this sea turtle, the odds of coming up to take a breath once in a 100-year lifetime and having to pop your head through a little hole in a piece of wood that's floating on the surface of this entire ocean. And that's the preciousness of a human life, in that it is our great opportunity to do this practice of Buddhism, to have the opportunity to wake up, and quite rare. Let's see, there was something else. I don't remember what it was. Oh, yeah. So we also have a wonderful story from our tradition that came quite a bit later after the Buddha's lifetime, and comes to us from China. So you may have this question in your mind of sort of, what are the mechanics of enlightenment? And this was something that became a debate in early Buddhist communities. Is it something that just happens instantaneously? Or is it something that happens slowly over time, right? So we have this kind of sea turtle example as the metaphor, but actually the early monks had some great debate about this. And so there is a sutra called the Platform Sutra from early China that is the life story of a man named Yu Ning. He was a woodcutter who couldn't read. And one day as he was out working, he heard a monk passing through and reciting the Diamond Sutra. And he had an awakening experience just suddenly. So he sought out a teacher after this and himself became a renowned teacher. And in that Platform Sutra, there is this wonderful scene. It's actually quite a dramatic story, where Li Meng is asked to write a poem to express his awareness of this great truth. And then there's already a monk at the monastery where he's kind of, as a new person, almost an interloper, has come in, who everyone kind of assumes is going to just kind of take over and be the leader. And so these are the only two people who write poems. This sort of established monk writes his poem, and then Li Meng, this new guy who just showed up out of nowhere and couldn't even read, dictates his poem to someone, and they write them on the walls of the temple. And in this story, it is a dramatization of this question of, is enlightenment something that's instantaneous, or is it something that happens slowly over time? And you might guess, Li Meng's poem was about instant enlightenment. And the established monk, maybe a little bit more traditionalist, was about slowly over time having this awakening. So we might want to, from that story, kind of pick a side, the one that appeals to us or the one that seems more true to us. But I think actually what is being asked of us as practitioners in that particular kind of tension there is to practice as if both are true, right? In any moment, be open to the fact that you could have some realization of awakening. And then also you have to put in the work, you know? So I think for me, that's how I kind of understand that teaching of gradual versus sudden enlightenment, is acting as if both are true. And similarly, as we're going to read in a little bit, the story of the Buddha's own life, just out of curiosity, how many of you have heard the story of the Buddha's awakening experience, his enlightenment experience? Okay, about half. Nice. You may recall sort of the strenuous efforts that he puts in. We're going to hear a little bit about that. And I always think about, there's a statue in the Detroit Institute of Art, in the Buddhist art wing, that is the Buddha kind of sitting like this, and it's in his ascetic years. And so you can walk around the platform that this statue is sitting on and count every rib, because he's so emaciated from not taking in very much food and really kind of pushing himself, because he had this deep question of, what is this human life all about? And I wanted to share just a couple of lines from, in his own words, as they were recorded in Buddhist scripture, kind of a little bit of this, this effort that he put forth. So you may recall then from the story that he was raised as a prince in northern India. And so in the Sukamala Sutra, he is telling the monks later in life sort of what this whole scene was about. So he says, "Monks, I lived in refinement, utmost refinement, total refinement. My father even had lotus ponds made in our palace, one where red lotuses bloomed, one where white lotuses bloomed, one where blue lotuses bloomed, all for my sake. But of course, as we know from the story, this life of privilege and sort of having all of his physical needs met still didn't answer this nagging question that he had about what this deeper path was about. So he actually leads the palace life, and he seeks out various teachers. And he tries all these different practices to just try to understand this state of mind that we're all struggling with. What is it about our minds that are leading us around? And so about his ascetic years, this is from the Mahasataka Sutra. He says, suppose that I, clenching my teeth and pressing my tongue against the roof of my mouth, were to beat down, constrain, and crush my mind with my awareness, just as a strong man, seizing a weaker man, would beat down, constrain, and crush him. In the same way, I beat down, constrained, and crushed my mind with my awareness. I can relate to that myself, and it turns out it doesn't work. That's what he discovered as well. So that wasn't it. And he goes on then to, as I mentioned about the statute, to begin to withhold food. And he writes, simply from eating so little, my limbs became like the jointed segments of vine stems. My spine stood out like a string of beads. And not taking nourishment also didn't kind of arrest his mind and his suffering and his desire to have a deeper understanding. So let's read the story so we can hear a little bit more of what he experienced. This is about 5 pages long, so I think what we will do is pass the book and have each person read a good paragraph. And this is sort of a folktale version of this story. So this is from a book called The Hungry Tigress, Buddhist Myths, Legends, and Jataka Tales, as told by Rafe Martin, who's a contemporary Buddhist storyteller. So I'll read the first one, and then we'll pass the book and the mic. At the age of 29, in the midst of his life of luxury, the prince of the Shakya clan, Siddhartha Gautama, saw for the first time an old man, a sick man, a dead man, and last of all, a solitary monk, and was sorely troubled. He saw now that his life of privilege brought neither real happiness nor freedom. His pleasure was an illusion, for it was temporary, without substance. Even as he strolled in his gardens and the palace women danced, they all grew older. Sickness stalked the land. Death came to every house, every palace and hut. Yes, his people suffered.
Late in the night he awoke. The dancing girls lay in sleep as if fell, their limbs tossed about and twisted, their bodies uncovered. In that instant, all delight and desire was gone. It was like awakening in a charnel ground. He went to the side of Yursadar, his wife. His newborn son lay beside her. To hold them now might wake them. If they woke, he knew he might never leave. I will return, he vowed, when sickness, age, and death are conquered. Then he roused Chana, the charioteer, mounted the horse, Kundaka, Kundaka, left the palace and rode to the river boundary of his father's kingdom. Chana begged him to forbear and return, but beneath the dark sky and shining stars, he cut his long hair with a single sword stroke, severing his attachment to palace life. Then, crossing the river, he passed forever from that sheltered life of wealth and ease, and disappeared alone into the dark forests and snow-covered mountains.
He made his way to the hermitages of the 2 greatest religious teachers of his time and mastered their methods, matching their inner attainments, but still he found no freedom from birth, old age, sickness, and death. So he again moved on alone. The most isolated of places. The deep forests
the graveyards, and charnel grounds. There, the delicate and once carefully sheltered ex-prince exerted his will. He forced himself to face all the terrors of darkness and isolation, in which voices seemed to cry, "Flee!" And the rustlings and snappings of branches made his hair stand on end in pure fear. He persevered through the most fearsome austerities. He baked himself between great fires during the stifling heat of midday and sat silent and naked through freezing nights on the mountainsides. He stood erect on one leg, unmoving. He held one arm aloft, unmoving. Weeks passed. The nails grew and pierced his flesh. The muscles shriveled and cramped. But in these things he found no freedom.
Then he gradually reduced his intake of food until he was eating first 1,000, then 100, then 10, then last just one single sesame seed a day. His flesh withered. His eyes sank so deep into their sockets they became like the faint gleam of light reflecting from the water at the bottom of a well. His hair rotted and, when he rubbed his limbs, fell out. Every rib, each bony socket and joint, and joint stood clearly exposed, like the wreck of a ship. Then the tide withdraws. After
After 6 years of continuous effort, exhausted and near the point of death, he collapsed, more a skeleton wound with sinews and veins than a living man.
In all this, he had found no liberating truth, no freedom, and it seemed that he must die without attaining his goal. The bitterness of that moment, after those 6 years of unrelenting but now seemingly wasted effort, was keener than a knife.
Suddenly there flashed into his mind the memory of a festival from his childhood. He had been seated quietly under a rose apple tree, watching his father, all the nobles and the poor men plowing the earth together. He saw the earth breaking open in even, wave-like furrows, the heat shimmering up off the freshly opened soil and shining on the sweat-slick brows and straining bodies of men and oxen alike. He saw the sun continuously flashing off the gilded traces and horns of the oxen, and he heard that senseless, plodding rhythm of hooves and cowbells rolling in a solemn, sea-like way. He heard the thrill shouts of the men and the whirring cries of the birds as they dove to devour the billowing hordes of insects, glistening grubs, cutworms, and broken bodies of mice, which men, oxen, and plows left in their wake.
Sorry, I'm just looking for the last words.
Men left in their wake.
You see?
Yeah, that left in their wake, I think was the last phrase.
Okay, thanks. The terribly obvious laboring, devouring, suffering, and dying that went on interminably beneath all the gay surface tinseling of his festival days had broken in upon him, and then weighed heavily on his mind.
Seated alone beneath the sweet smiling rose apple tree, reflecting deeply on the scene before him. He suddenly entered a profound experience of Semendai. Trees and mountains, insects and animals, the earth and people, while remaining each themselves, all now formed one vast living whole.
Before I go, did you want to read? Okay. 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 Oh, living whole. Now, at the brink of death and in the depths of despair, this memory returned to him, filling him with energy and sureness. If I already glimpsed the ancient way, he thought, while still just a child, well fed and clothed, then truth-seeking cannot consist of mere punishment of the body. I shall take proper nourishment once again.
As if in response to this unvoiced decision, Sujata, maiden from the neighboring village, came before him and humbly offered a bowl of milk rice.
He accepted her offering. His 5 fellow ascetics, disciples, who had followed him throughout his 6 years of heroic effort, were outraged. Convinced that the ex-prince had abandoned the quest for truth, they summarily left him. Alone, he ate in silence. When he finished, somehow he felt strong enough to stand, and leaning on his staff, he rose and made his way to the shore of the Naranjana River, which flowed nearby. He bathed in the water, letting 6 years of matted filth and dirt wash away.
Climbing up onto the shore again, he announced,
It is on.
Hello. Climbing up onto the shore again, he announced, "If this is the day of my supreme enlightenment, may the bowl float upstream." And he cast his empty offering bowl onto the waters. As soon as the bowl touched the surface of the river, it forged upstream against the current until it came to the whirlpool of Kalanaga Raja, the black snake king who dwells on the river bottom. There it whirled down into the jeweled chambers of the Naga king's palace. It stopped against an endless row of identically formed bowls, and hearing that little noise, clink, the black Naga king opened his eyes. Slowly he raised his great hooded head and announced, "Only yesterday a Buddha arose. Today there shall be another Buddha. Awake, rejoice." Then, swaying in that shining, simmering light, he began to chant his ancient songs in praise of the Bodhisattva's assured triumph and victory.
And the Bodhisattva, Siddhartha Gautama, strode like a roused lion toward the Bo tree. There, in the cool, soft light of the late afternoon, he met a poor grass cutter named Sophia, who offered him 8 bundles of freshly cut grass as a sitting cushion and mat. Then the future Buddha, spreading the grass on the earth at the base of the tree, seated himself in the lotus posture and made this determination. Though only my skin, sinews, and bones remain, and my blood and flesh dry up and wither away, yet never from this seat will I stir until I have attained full enlightenment. And he pressed forward once again in deep meditation. Then many fearsome and foul, as well as many seductive and pleasant visions arose before and all around him. All of the forces of life's desire for joy, comfort, and ease were swaying to him in the form of 3 women, the 3 beautiful daughters of Mara, the tempter. They danced before him, offering exquisite pleasure, unceasing comfort, endless rest, while all of life's terrors, fears of death and suffering, fears of hell's horrors, pain, ugliness, the unknown, robbed him, shrieking of torment and deformity, of all manner of terrible and disgusting experience should he persist. Mara's army descended upon him, horse-headed, 10-eyed, tiger-faced, many-armed, with faces in their chests, with sharp yellow teeth and blood-dripping mouths, with spiders for hands, and hissing with adders' tongues. On they came, leaving stones, knives, spears, hurling flaming discs, mud, filth. Screaming madly, they whirled down upon him like a flock of hunger-maddened crows, wildly striving to peck and tear some slight scraps of nourishment from a huge, smooth stone, but they could not.
The future Buddha sat on, viewing all these wild displays evenly, surely, calmly, completely unmoved. It was as if he were watching the antics of children at play. The knives and spears turned into flowers and garlands, the mud and filth became incense and perfume. The beautiful women grew old, and the howling armies stood silent.
Then Mara, the tempter himself, approached the future Buddha. Assuming the voice of Gautama's own innerness, the habitual voice of his own thoughts, he began to question the future Buddha with these words. Are you sure you are the one? Sure you have this Buddha nature? Sure you are worthy of coming to supreme enlightenment today, right now? Think of it. Supreme enlightenment, supreme enlightenment.
The future Buddha only touched the earth lightly with his right hand and asked the earth to witness for him.
And the earth replied with 100, 1,000, 100,000 voices, the voices of furrows and graves, voices of youth and age, of man, woman, and child, the unheeded cries of beast, the quick, unknown, silvery language of fish, the sweet tinings of plants, and the warm, gray crumblings of stone. For all were one voice now thundering. He is worthy. There is not one spot on this globe where he has not offered himself selflessly through countless lifetimes for the attainment of enlightenment and the welfare of all living beings.
Mara's host dropped their weapons and fled. His daughters prostrated themselves and asked forgiveness. His great war elephant, Mountain Purdy, crashed to the ground like a heap of stone. The flowers faded and the incense and perfume drifted away. All was gone.
Alone beneath the tree, the future Buddha had only pressed out.
Deeper and deeper, without stopping anywhere.
Transcending all limitations, swallowing up the darkness with his own light, until with the dawn, his mind grows clear and radiant, and obvious as the day. And when he glanced at the morning star, he found enlightenment itself. Wonder of wonders. Intrinsically, all living beings are Buddhas, fully endowed with wisdom.
It was December 8th. He was 35 years of age and had broken through to what others as yet only half dreamed. The path had been reopened. The Dharma was once again accessible to the efforts of humans and devas. In the steadily rising morning light, a fully realized Buddha now sat beneath the suddenly blossoming tree. So I'm just going to read the last line, his realization, one more time. And when he glanced at the morning star, he found enlightenment itself, crying out, "Wonder of wonders! Intrinsically, all living beings are Buddhas, fully endowed with wisdom and virtue." In other versions of the story, he also says, "How terrible that they do not know," you know. And so, similar to some of the brief stories that I shared at the beginning, we hear some similar elements. All of the effort that he had to put forth. And then the realization of, I knew the truth all along. The story that he remembers is from his childhood. The recognition of this cycle of birth and death when he watched people plow in the fields and seeing insects cut up by the plow and birds coming to eat them. And yet, even as he was watching this as a child, sitting under the cool shade of this rose apple tree, this kind of scene of both suffering and then sort of this joy present as well. And so, for me, what I think what I take from this story, and it's, the phrase isn't used in this particular version, but what he discovered is what we call now the middle way. So he tried all of these extremes, right? Starving himself, standing between two fires, standing on one leg, not bathing. And he had already experienced the other extreme as a young person in this life with the palace and the 3 lotus ponds of 3 different colors of lotus, etc. And so he had to essentially kind of calibrate his practice to something that was the balance between those extremes. And there's a nun in Korea who's a contemporary. Her name is Jung Kwon, and she's an amazing cook. And I read this little reflection that she had done about this story, and she says, Buddhism started with a meal. He actually has to take nourishment and take care of his human form to even have the energy to practice. And he experiences his enlightenment soon after taking in that food. And so, you know, the most important ingredient then that we can understand from these stories is that we've got it, the human life, right? And eating is important. Taking care of your human form is important. And so I think that's kind of the beautiful aspect of the middle way is that each person with that awareness of, I have this ability, I have the ability to practice and experience the spiritual path, also has to calibrate for themselves. What does that look like? We heard the examples of Li Nang, the woodcutter, who just happened to hear this poem in the right way and it struck him. We've got the story of the Buddha, of many years of difficult practice. And I always remember a particular saying that this Japanese Zen teacher, Katagiri Roshi, he was a Japanese man, a monk who came to practice in Minnesota in the 80s and 90s, and he had many Western students, American students. And one of his students wrote a memoir about his experience of working with this teacher. And so Katagiri Roshi would always tell his students, you're all perfect just as you are, and you all could use a little improvement. And I think that's sort of the perfect encapsulation of the middle way, in the sense of we hear something like that, it sounds kind of contradictory, and Zen is full of these seemingly contradictory kinds of teachings, like everyone has a Buddha nature, And you have to work really hard to kind of realize it sometimes. Maybe you can be like Elaine here at home. But I think from the big perspective, those seeming contradictions are an attempt to give kind of instructions to everyone with the understanding that you have to understand for yourself, like what's the rules of the road. It's like saying, well, go right and go left. Well, you kind of have to figure out for yourself what the expression of that is. And so I think that's what he means by you're all perfect just as you are, and you all can use a little improvement. Let's see, if there's anything else. Yeah. So let me just finish with one brief quote then, and I will open it up for comments. This is from a piece of writing from our founding teacher, Venerable Samu Sunam, from 2012, December of 2012. And he was also quite funny. And he used to tell people that to be born in a human life and not seek the path of awakening is like going to Treasure Island and coming back with no treasure. So this is maybe a little bit a different take on that same idea. Life is a great and wonderful journey for all beings. In this endless and collective journey, all beings are in kinship with one another. Anywhere, anytime, as multifaceted and varied as the outward forms of many different lives may look, they all evolve and coalesce into one whole shared life over a long wayfaring of many lifetimes. Therefore, all lives are precious and must be cherished in order to maintain the movement of life force. It is our duty as Buddhists to ensure the integrity of our journey together toward the salvation of all. Let us cultivate friendship and strive to promote peace and perfect harmony among all beings. Be grateful for your being here and now among the living. Share your happiness and blessings. So I'm curious, in the last few minutes that we have, thinking about this idea of the central ingredient in these awakening experiences of human life, and also thinking about this teaching of the middle way, how to calibrate one's own expression of spiritual energy and devotion. What do you make of that? Is there something in your life that is sort of the calibration experience that you're working with right now? What is your version of the middle way right now? Come on.
I guess this is simple. I was recently hospitalized for medical reasons, and I went to inpatient. And I realized when I was waiting in the same room, I had a copy of this book by Trisha Hershey called Rest Resistance Manifesto. And I realized that it took me overworking in this society up until the point that I got very sick, to the point where I did not feel okay or safe and needed to go into inpatient in order to even start resting. And that calibration was where I was working at. And that book is just excellent. And I think it's really for everyone. I don't think any of us get enough rest, just like Trisha Hershey says in that book. It really helped me and settled me down. I was like, I need to be here to rest. And if I had rested, I wouldn't have came here to begin with. And Buddha's ascetic journey, when he's receiving enlightenment, involves nourishing the body, resting the body. And in the book, it's talking about resting to relax and come back to our innate divinity. So enlightenment.
Yeah, what was the book called again?
Rest is Resistance, a Manifesto.
Rest is Resistance. Yeah, thank you so much. Anyone else? Well, thank you so much. Oh, did you have a comment? Yeah.
I'm Kat, and I think for me, it's right now the calibration involves recognizing that I don't know some things. Like, it's very easy for me to stay in a place of like, well, I know what the answer is and feel very like comforted by that. But then things get stale and move too fast usually. And so to just take that pause to rest and say like, I don't know what the answer is like a way to recalibrate and allow something new to come in.
Well, thank you so much for your comments and for reading the story together. I think we'll leave it there for now. Do we have any announcements?
Yeah, sure. Hello again, everyone. I'm Simone. If I didn't introduce myself, Vince Marshall, and I'm glad you're here. And it's been an interesting beginning of the year so far. We've been through the Buddhist Enlightenment, Haji's birthday. Now we're moving forward into some of the more everyday aspects of Buddhism. We have our regular 10 a.m. services, and alternately, the second week of every month, there's a family service. So you're welcome to come to those. I just want to let you know, just in case, like maybe you have kids or something, you want to bring them. We have this whole family program. And we've got some classes in the evening. There's yoga classes here Tuesdays at 6:30. Just show up, and you don't need to meet on that. There are sometimes meditation classes on Thursdays, but I see there aren't any until February 15th. But we do have something coming up, must be next weekend, and Friday and Saturday, Friday night to Saturday noon. You can come and learn all that information and get all that practice and refinement. And you don't have to come just once. You can come as many times as you like. So that's always a nice thing. On Sundays, we have Recovery Dharma, which is across the way. And John, tell you.
We'll meet at the historic temple at noon. Go up the steps through the front door. Please take your shoes off. Keep going straight, and you'll run right into us.
Okay, great. Yeah. And so it's about 11:30 now, but we had both tea and Haji shared with us some of her birthday baklava and donuts, maybe, or little rolls. And so you're welcome. Please, when you can out into the lobby here, you can just have tea or cakes, or just feel free to go. But I'll have to tell you, it is kind of cold out there, so you might want to kind of hang around for a while. So yeah, with that, I'll just tell you a couple other things. We have like a donation bowl outside here for monetary contributions, which is always appreciated. And we appreciate your being here and taking part in the events of the temple. So yeah, I think we're going to have one more little thing here.
Thanks, Moon. Mom, do you want us to put away mats and cushions today? Okay. So we're going to end with the 4 great vows and then stand in front of the altar and make 3 formal vows before we exit. If you have a mat and cushion that is not touching the red carpet at the center of the room, we would appreciate your assistance in putting it away neatly. The flat mats go in the back corner over there, and the cushions go on those red shelves. But first, 4 great vows. Please repeat after me. All beings, one body.
All beings, one body.
I vow to liberate.
I vow to liberate.
Blind passions, one root.
Blind passions, one root.
I vow to terminate.
I vow to terminate.
Dharma gates, one mind.
Dharma gates, one mind.
I vow to penetrate.
I vow to penetrate.
The great way of Buddha.
The great way of Buddha.
I vow to realize.
I vow to realize.
So we'll end with 3 bows. I just realized, I'm so sorry. No, it's okay. I'll just put this down in the back. Just taking a moment to breathe, facing up there. And then give you a bow.